Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome. Good morning. I'm David Breeden. I'm the Senior Minister here at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. Welcome on this Labor Day weekend. I'm joined today by some FUS members who are going to play beautiful music. Maureen Hunt, Martha Hardesty, thanks so much for being here today with your music. Music director Mike Vosich is in the building, and we're going to be hearing quite a bit about him and from him next week. So stay tuned for that. If everyone will turn for just a moment and wave to the camera, the little green light back there. Hi, everybody out there in the other world. And then, if you will look to your right and to your left, wherever you are, and say, I'm glad to see you today. Yeah, First Unitarian Society is a little bit different. For one thing, I would invite you to use your smartphone if you have one. And if you get any good pictures today, send them to me, minister@firstunitarian.org. Our social media loves photographs. So the more colorful pics, the better. First Unitarian Society is a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, and we are an intentionally and radically inclusive congregational humanist community dedicated to fostering a free search for knowledge and meaning, striving for justice, and serving one another, the Twin Cities, and beyond. This congregation has been proudly congregational humanist since 1916, and as in the words of the First Humanist Manifesto, we strive for a shared life in a shared world. The theme for our summer, now ending, has been Long Light of Summer, Finding Rest, Wonder, and Joy, and I hope you found that. Next Sunday is the beginning of our new program year. We got all kinds of wonderful things planned for you. Traditionally, we do a gathering of the waters. So if you have been gathering some water somewhere on your journeys this summer, please bring it, and we will pour those together as a way of saying, here we are back together again. So join us next week for sure. After assembly today, where will the retreat to the woods table be for everybody to sign up?
There's not going to be a table. There's going to be me. I'm Cindy Nast. I'm the chair, and poster board, and I have the pamphlets for registration and information for you. So just look for me in the poster board.
Yay, okay, and you can get signed up today for a retreat to the woods. Those of you who don't know about that, definitely ask some of the members who have been around and find out. It's a very good time, the first weekend in October, which, hey, that's not too long away. If you're in the building today, join us for a mini meal downstairs and coffee, conversation, and some good food, vegan friendly, etc. And we'll be very nice, I think, outside today. What we got in beautiful downtown Minneapolis, we got 64 degrees, so perfect picnic weather for Minnesotans outside today. Thanks to our audio-visual engineers who make our online presence possible. And whether you are joining us today in the building or online, welcome. change we need for a more just, compassionate, and peaceful world. And now I think we've got some congregational singing to do. If you will please rise as you are able and turn to
page 128.
We are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad. For needs which others serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain, and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for all life in our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad.
And if you will stay standing, please, and repeat with me our Congregational Covenant. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Please be seated. First Unitarian Society exists because of the generosity and time, talent, and treasure of our people. This congregation is independently funded and democratically governed. You can help one way by helping out on social media, as I was mentioning earlier. Send us photos from around the building today if you have any, minister@firstunitarian.org. Also, if you are on any of the social media platforms, forward, whatever that particular one does. We are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like the video. All of those things help us get our message out more efficiently. None of what we do, of course, is free, and so we do ask for your help in keeping First Unitarian Society healthy. The easiest way to do that is to go to our website, firstunitarian.org, and click on the Give link at the upper right corner. Also, you can give on PayPal, the Vanco mobile app. You can even send us a good old-fashioned check or drop one off in the office. And also, we have new slide technology that should be working, I'm hoping, after assembly today. Thanks so much for making all of this possible. On Sundays, we take a few moments to reflect on the joys and sorrows and milestones of the human experience. We do this in order to stay in touch with our own humanity and to remind ourselves of the value of a moment of stillness in all the noise of life. And we do this so that no one among us is alone in celebrating a joy or in facing the burdens of life. We are here for each other, is what we think here. A sorrow to report, FUS member Barbara Mayer died late last week. She was 104 years old. A joy, FUS member Ellen Soderland turned 100 on September the 1st. 100 years old, Thanks, and great to see you when you get back here, Aylin. She remembers walking to FUS in the 1920s. So she has been attending this congregation for quite some time. Now we take a few moments to reflect on our world and those who work to comfort the suffering and work for justice.
When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. This is called a prayer for peace, and it's for flute and piano, and thinking of and sending support for all Ukrainians from the United Kingdom.
Thank you all so much for that. Wow. Well, our theme for the summer of 2022 has been the long light of summer, finding rest, wonder, and joy. And here we are at the weekend that traditionally marks the end of the summer season, back to school time. A time that always filled me with dread when I was in grade school and high school. Still today, all you have to say is back to school sale, and I have a sinking feeling in my stomach. I can smell the cardboard of my book satchel, and yes, it reeked of cardboard, and it was supposed to look like leather, but nobody was fooled. I hated school. I really, really hated school. But, how come I hated high school and grade school so much, and then I fell in love with it, and I got a whole bunch of degrees. And, I'm always wanting to get another one. Well, because college classes were not like the classes, at least in how they felt in grade school and high school. They felt somehow like what I was learning mattered. It felt important to my life. And suddenly, education was fun and enjoyable. Now, I get that all of that is a subjective reality. I felt like what I was learning had meaning and purpose for me, even though, a little known fact with some of my knowledge, you can't order a pizza in Old English. You just can't for several reasons. I don't know why. I only love dead languages. But I get interested in things like, why can't you order a pizza in Old English? I like the history of ideas. When can people think and do certain things in certain ways? The same, I would argue, is also true for work. Whether you hate it or you love it, it is about meaning and purpose. Here we are at a moment of the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. Whole sections of restaurants are closed due to staff shortages. Businesses are opening later, closing earlier due to staffing shortages. Some small businesses are giving up and closing their doors because they can't get enough people. As we come out of the pandemic, many people who can retire are retiring rather than going back to work, and many who can work remotely are demanding to work remotely. Something is happening, and I think that something has something to do with why I stopped hating school, seeing the worth in what I was doing, finding value. That insight was summed up well by the American writer Studs Terkel when he wrote, quote, "Most of us have jobs that are too small for our spirits." Most of us have jobs that are too small for our spirits. Well, as many of you know, I grew up on a farm among farm people, and we traveled constantly trying to find work, going back to the farm, going off to factories for a while, et cetera, et cetera. And when I was young, the common phrase for working off the farm was public work, as in she went off for public work and come back with a car and such as that, which fairly well summed up what farmers were looking for back in those days. Public work was about making money, then, if at all possible, getting back to the farm as quickly as possible. Public work was considered dull, repetitive, demeaning, and lucrative. Public work was about working for people you had no respect for, making things that made rich people even richer. In those days, the lucky, mostly men and mostly white, got into labor unions. My father was in the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, Iron Ship Builders, Blacksmiths, Forgers, and Helpers. And the term brotherhood in the title kind of says what they were in those days. The expectation was men, and mostly white men. Nowadays, the Boilermakers are part of the United Steelworkers Union, and actually, you may not know the whole title, but it's Labor Day weekend, so here it is, the United Steel, Paper, and Forestry, Rubber, Manufacturing, Energy, Allied, Industrial, and Service Workers International Union. And there are commas in there, and I think I got them in the right spot, right? And nowadays, yes, they are open to everyone for membership. Now, my mother and her generation also worked in factories, but women didn't get into labor unions back in those days. And that gender discrepancy goes way back. As a matter of fact, what I want to do is celebrating a little bit about Labor Day weekend is to talk about the 1912 Lawrence, Massachusetts textile strike, better known as the Bread and Roses strike. Now, in the early 20th century, Lawrence, Massachusetts was the center of textile manufacturing in the U.S., and the mills had drawn immigrants from all over the world. Workers there spoke over 50 languages. Also, due to the nature of the textile machines of the day, women and children with their smaller hands and arms were most of the workforce. The only labor union that admitted women in those days was the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, better known as the Wobblies because so many of their members spoke so little English that they were said to wobble, 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 talk like that by the bigots of America. Now, that's the setup for the Bread and Roses strike. The phrase bed and roses occurred in a speech by a women's rights activist there on the screen, Helen Todd. Bread for all, roses too, she demanded. Then a St. Paul, Minnesota native, who I think, alas, St. Paul has probably forgotten, is James Oppenheim. He took that phrase and turned it into a poem published in Songs for the New Age. And then that became the lyrics for a song called Bread and Roses that is now associated with the labor union. Bread and Roses has come to represent the dual call of human beings seeking both livable wages and a flourishing, spiritually fulfilling life. Bread and roses. Now, one of the heroes to emerge from the Lawrence strike was Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. She was a member of the Industrial Workers of the World, and her fiery rhetoric led her to be called the Rebel Girl. And there was a song written called Rebel Girl that was written by the guy we're going to hear about at the end of today, Joe Hill, who licensed it in order to raise money for the IWW. Later, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, by the way, as a result of the popularity and fame she gathered from speaking at this strike, went on to help form the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. So basic health and safety measures, fair pay, shorter hours, that was the call. The results of the strike were not encouraging. Well, let's fast forward to today. Yes, the IWW did like their capitalist pig art, right, from the time period. There's Rebel Girl. You know, you couldn't sell singles back in those days, so you sold sheet music, right? So there's Helen off to form the one big union. Well, today, we can say, eventually, 25 years later, there were child labor laws passed. Eventually, women were allowed into unions that were not being constantly busted by the FBI. But we shouldn't let ourselves off too easily. An article in Bloomberg by journalist Claire Sudouth says it all. It's getting harder. Yeah, you've seen that headline, haven't you? It's getting harder to be a woman in America. Women hold 2/3 of student loan debt in the country. I hadn't known that when we talk about forgiving student loans, but yes, women hold 2/3 of student loan debt. Half of women aged 55 to 66 have no retirement savings. Again, That's a very high percentage. No savings for retirement. And the women to men's earnings ratio has stayed in the 80 to 83% range since 2004. The disparity just goes on. Which sounds a little bit dispiriting, doesn't it? It sounds like, well, for a lot of women, there's very little bread and no roses even today. Also, we know the list goes on in attacks on American women today. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn would be turning over in her grave. So, back to the question of what is being asked of us today in terms of bread and roses. Heavy borrowing to gain an education, jobs that provide no retirement or other basic benefits, and that dismal history of women making way less than men. Not much bread and no roses. Why is it still more than a century after the bread and roses strike that the words Studs Terkel said are truer now than ever? Most of us have jobs that are too small for our spirits. Now, I've been a manager for a long time, first in the academic world and then in the congregational world. Our academic industry, as it's usually called, the religion business, as it's often called. Well, so I've learned a little bit, I hope, over those many years. And one lesson that I think anybody who's ever been in management knows is that some people don't care and they won't care no matter what you do. Okay, that's fine. Some people can't fail and won't fail no matter what you do. And then there is the vast middle of those extremes, people who do care and will do good work if they have the chance to succeed. They will succeed if they believe in what they're doing. As a manager, the goal is to minimize that former, of course, and you want to maximize the latter, but again, most people are somewhere in between. That's one thing I've learned from my life, that almost all human beings want to do something for other human beings. It's just how we are. When we feel like we're doing that thing that we feel like we ought to be doing for our fellow human beings or the planet and living things, that's our happy place for most of us. In most cases, if we feel we're doing that, we have that spiritual rise to us. The contempt and hatred that farm families had for public work when I was a kid growing up was in contrast to how we felt about farming. Everybody works on a farm, that goes without saying, from the smallest to the oldest. One of my mother's earliest memories was sitting under a tree at the end of a fence row, watching her mother harvesting wheat, before mechanization, of course. Everybody worked on the farm, but not really, because as some wag or other pointed out, it's only work if you don't want to do it, right? So farm work wasn't work, it was how we lived. And that actually is good for the spirit. It's telling that there's a good old phrase that many hands make happy work. That's been around in English since the 1300s. So it's been a long time. Hey, let's pitch in together. It's a good old-fashioned saying. Work that's clear, meaningful, has purpose. It's not work, then. It's being alive. Work that feels like play just isn't work. It's having a life. Well, what does labor look like today in this 50-year low for unemployment? What does laboring even mean today? Certainly it doesn't mean what it meant for my parents going off to factories. What would a philosophy or a theology of decent work look like? Because we don't have one clearly articulated, do we? Reflect, as I've mentioned before, trust in institutions is at an all-time low. I've mentioned that before, except for labor unions, who score the biggest in terms of percentages of trust. Now, I wonder why that is. Well, I suspect that one reason is partly to do with that us factor. Unions are about solidarity. It's about sticking together. It's about having to trust each other. And we know that people are in it for the right reasons. Because Studs Terkel got it right. Most of us have jobs that are too small for our spirits. If you haven't read that brilliant book of his called Working, do yourself a favor, Studs Terkel Working. It's a brilliant, brilliant book because he was able to ask people deep questions about what they really cared about. And what's apparent in that book, and what I've learned in my life of watching farm life die off, well, the thing is, managing human beings is about finding your own joy and everyone else's. People don't want to work, but people do want something valuable to do in their lives, something of value. And so that's the deeper question for those of us who believe in liberal religion and liberal society is what is a liberal view of making meaningful work? And I don't think we really have an answer. Shouldn't our laws and our cultural assumptions reflect our liberal values? Values that, the inherent worth of it and dignity of every person. There's your roses, there's your flourishing. That's what female workers were asking for back in 1912. I can honestly say that my mother never got either bread or roses from any of her public work. And think about your mother and your grandmother. How did it work out for them? Often not very well. But that's what we are called to do, is create a situation in which we have both bread and roses.
Now let's sing a little bit about bread and roses. Number 109, As We Come Marching, Marching. And the words will be up on the screen as well.
As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 workshops gray, are touched with all the radiance that abundance and discloses. For the people hear us singing bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle to form for they are women's children, and we mother them again. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts strive as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead go crying through our singing their ancient song of bread. Small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we go marching stronger, we bring the greater days. The rising of the women means the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler, tend the toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories. Bread and roses, bread and roses.
Thanks for singing that. If you will be seated and repeat with me our extinguishing the chalice words. can find it. Up, there we go. Okay, well, we'll wing it then. Yes, we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All of these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together again. Thanks for winging it. And the closing words are from Howard Thurman, great mentor of Martin Luther King. He said, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive. And go do that, because that's what the world needs, people who have come alive."
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive. I'm sorry. You start again.
Joan Baez is now here. Joan Baez is now here. Go ahead.
All right.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you or me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, said he. I never died, says he. The copper bosses kill you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe. I didn't die, says Joe. I didn't die. And standing there as big as life and smiling with his eyes, says Joe, what can they never kill? Went on to organize, went on to organize. From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where working folks defend their rights, it's there you'll find Joe Hill. It's there you'll find Joe Hill. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you or me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, said he. I never died.